I would take the parlay without Jan, and I actually see a scenario where this hits.
How you doing, fight fans? I'm Timmy Shoes with Inside Fighting, and I'm here with another edition of How to Fuck Up Your Parlay, UFC 282 edition. I'm joined by Jesse Rowe, our editor at Inside Fighting. Jesse, how you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
I'm great. Now, we have a pretty interesting card. It's not the main event that the fans wanted. It's not the rematch of Glover Teixeira and Yuri Prochazka, which was going to be a banger. Glover Teixeira and Yuri Prochazka just won Fight of the Year at the MMA World Awards. But now it's Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev. And the thing that sticks out to me about this main card is that there are a lot of high-value underdogs. I think every single underdog on this card has a path to victory. And interestingly enough, the main event has the biggest underdog in a championship fight. You don't usually see that. Usually the bigger underdogs somewhere else on the card. So what do you make of that? These underdogs that we have on the main card.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Jan versus Magomed, I mean, I think there's a pretty obvious reason for that, and that's the fact that it wasn't intended to be the title fight. It was very much Jan was the last step, if you will, before Ankalaev got the title shot, just because I think it seems pretty inevitable that whoever won in the no longer happening Yuri versus Glover 2, whoever won that fight was most likely going to face Ankalaev, assuming that Ankalaev won this fight. So it makes sense that this would be the biggest of underdogs. But that being said, I'm looking at it, and there aren't a lot of underdogs that I think are slam dunks by any means. But I mean, maybe that's just me because I've just seen so many upsets lately, as you've lamented on, that maybe I'm just conditioned to believe that all of these are more even than the odds are letting you believe. But yeah, I would say that's the main reason. It's just because this was not intended to be the title fight, although I do think it is a very interesting fight.
It is an interesting fight. Now, obviously, Ankalaev, he's Dagestani. He's got that Dagestani wrestling. He's going to grapple. He's going to take Jan down. And we saw what Glover Teixeira did when he took Jan down. So I know MMA math doesn't always add up, but on paper, at least, Ankalaev is probably going to take him down. He's going to ground and pound him. He's going to, advance positions. He's going to look for submissions. And that's why he is right now a minus 320 favorite on DraftKings. Jan Blachowicz is a plus 265 underdog. I still think that's a pretty valuable pick only because of that legendary Polish power. Jan Blachowicz can knock out anybody. He can find that chin. He has that left hook, and he's used it before. He's got great wins on his career. And Ankalaev, he's only lost once, but he also lost to Paul Craig, who caught him in a triangle. So I don't know if Jan's going to be trying to throw up triangles. I'm assuming at some point in the fight, Jan's going to be on the bottom, trying to work his way back to the top. His path to victory, though, is definitely to knock him out on the feet. That's what he has to hope for, I think.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. Is this is one of the all-time classic cases of course you can always, when you have knockout power like Jan does, of course you always have a chance to win. But this is quite literally the most evident case of it, where he's very likely going to be outpointed for the majority of this fight, so he's going to have to find a knockout at some point to win. But that being said, with the odds, obviously we haven't gotten to the parlay part of this yet, but I think he's getting a little bit of a raw deal with these odds, a little bit, to be honest. I mean, Jan's been in the game for so long. I mean, I'm not the biggest follower of MMA over the past 10 years, but I mean, I've known that name, and he's been in some big fights. I just think anybody who's as battle tested as he is and is still somewhat in the prime of his career, I would not be surprised to see Jan walk away with it, to be honest. I would not.
Moving on, a fight that a lot of fans are interested in is Paddy Pimblett versus Jared Gordon. Now, Paddy Pimblett is a minus 250 favorite. Jared Gordon is a plus 210 favorite, but a lot of people feel like Jared Gordon is Paddy Pimblett's toughest test to date. What do you make of that? Do you think this is Paddy's toughest fight?
Yes, so I talked a bit about this on the Fight Season podcast last week, and my belief is sometimes athletes, or especially fighters, they can't be judged based on their record or based on the odds, simply because there are just some people that transcend that, where I believe Jared Gordon is one of those guys that he may not be technically the most sound fighter Paddy has faced, but in terms of toughest opponent he's going to face, I just think that Jared Gordon's like life story and the things that he's been through in his life make him such an incredibly tough challenge for Paddy, where I genuinely think Paddy's probably going to have to dig deeper than he ever has to pull this fight out. I still think Paddy wins, to be honest, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a scenario where Paddy's actually struggling by the early part of the third round and he needs to find a submission of some kind to win, where we could be tied 1-1 going to the final round. That sort of scenario, I would not be surprised by that. I don't think this is going to be a domination by any means, and I just think Jared Gordon is like as tough as they come. I mean, a guy who's seen as much as he has in his personal life is not scared by any fight. So I think he's actually in for a very tough fight.
Yeah, I think plus 210 underdog. I think that's a great pick too, because Jared Gordon has a path to victory. I think, especially in the first rounds, looking back on Paddy's fights, especially in the early going, he's very hittable in the first rounds. His very first fight in the UFC, he almost got knocked out twice.
Right, Bisping called him out on that in his post-fight interview, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yes. Sometimes when he's throwing combinations, he leaves himself open. And he got countered hard in that first fight against Vandramini, I think it was.
Right.
And so Gordon's got nice boxing. He can put together combinations. So I think Paddy has the advantage in the grappling. They both got some wrestling, but if Gordon's going to win, I think he's going to have to piece together combinations on the feet. He's going to have to find those openings that Paddy gives him, because Paddy is hittable. And he likes to say that Scousers don't get knocked out. Right. But we have seen that. We've seen that with someone else on the card. We're going to get to him a little bit later.
Right.
But I think Gordon can win by putting together combinations. I agree with you that this is his toughest test. And that's a great point that you bring up. Jared Gordon's a guy, for people who don't know, he went through a lot of things in his life. He overcame addiction. The dude's been through a lot. He's been through the ringer. And you can't train for that kind of toughness. You can't train for that kind of grit. During the press conference, he said to Paddy that he tends to fade in fights. So I imagine, like you said, you imagined a scenario where Paddy may be fading in the third round. I think Gordon is anticipating that. So if Gordon can keep it standing, if he can avoid getting submitted, I think he has a pretty good chance to win this as a 210 underdog there. Yeah. Now, Santiago Ponzinibbio is now fighting Alex Morono. His original opponent was Robbie Lawler, who pulled out due to injury. Obviously, Alex Morono doesn't really have the name recognition that a guy like Robbie Lawler does. But Santiago Ponzinibbio, it's been rough seeing his transition, because he used to be a guy who was viewed as a potential welterweight champion during his prime. Then he got hit with a bunch of infections. He had staph. He had a blood-bone infection. He needed a bunch of surgeries. And he really hasn't been the same guy since. He got knocked out by Li Jingliang. He lost his last two fights by a split decision against Michel Pereira and Jeff Neal. So it's not like he's not hanging in there, but he's definitely not the world beater that he once was. He's a minus 180 favorite according to DraftKings. Morono is a plus 155 underdog. What do you make of that fight, Jesse?
So this is the blind spot, I'm going to call it. This is the blind spot bet for me here, Timmy, because I don't know much about either fighter. I do know a lot about Robbie Lawler, but obviously that is not happening. My one takeaway from this fight is both guys seem genuinely thankful towards the other guy for taking this fight, because this is a catchweight bout, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep, 180 pounds.
Yeah, so it was supposed to be I think it was supposed to be at welterweight and with Lawler, is that right?
Correct.
And then so it's a catchweight. This is one of those where I am going to flip a coin. I mean, the odds are relative. These are the closer odds other than Till and Duplessis. This looks like these are the closer odds in terms of the underdogs, in terms of the main card fights. Sorry. So I'm just looking at it here, and Ponzi's 1-3, and is it Ponzi 1-3 his last 4 fights, but as you pointed out, those were split decisions, were a couple of those losses. And Morono
did get knocked out by Leach. He was a heavy favorite in that fight against Li Jingliang. And I told everyone, go for a knockout for Li Jingliang. And that's exactly what happened, because he's not the same guy anymore after everything that he went through injury wise.
I would say, Morono being the late replacement, not having a full camp. Ponzi was planning for this. He had been training for Lawler. I in those situations, I always tend to lean towards the guy who's had a more full camp. But of course, we've seen with Nate Diaz against Conor McGregor that sort of thing doesn't always pan out the way you'd expect. So I'll take Ponzi in this one. I think since he is the favorite, it makes sense. But I'm going to flip a coin. I don't know, Timmy. Flipping a coin. I'll get one. I'll tell you what it is. How about that? I'll just flip it. So heads,
it's a good idea.
And tails, it's Morono. I'm going with heads. I'm going with Ponzinibbio.
All right, nice, because I'm going with Morono, and my reasoning is he's been in the UFC for a while. He's not really at a championship caliber. He's a journeyman, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. He's a great fighter, and he's finding his stride. He's on a 4-fight win streak. I think he's going to view this as an opportunity to maybe set himself up for some bigger fights going forward. He's been in the UFC since, I think, 2016. So if he beats Ponzi, he's going to find some bigger opportunities down the line. That'll be 5 fights in a row. He'll be cracking the top 10. So I'm going to go with Morono just because I like the underdogs on this card. Yeah. Darren Till is taking on Dricus du Plessis from South Africa. Dricus is a guy who's been on the come up. He's undefeated in the UFC. He's a guy a lot of people see as a potential title contender in the near future. And Darren Till is sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum. He's a guy people saw as a potential welterweight champion, as a guy who needed to move up but could still compete at middleweight, and it just hasn't worked out. He's 1-4 in his last 5 fights, and those are the only 4 losses of his career. So obviously he's hit a bad stride. Now, Till is a 150 underdog, plus 150 underdog, and du Plessis is a minus 175 favorite. What do you make of this matchup?
This is so tough just because you always feel like Darren Till is supposed to be better than things have gone for him. I said on the podcast that I think he's due for a win. But like the more I learn about du Plessis, I understand why he's the favorite. Till was making the point about how he's only 29 years old and that he's still young, and how people he doesn't understand that people are giving up on him so quickly, which I completely understand that. But he is one of those 29-year-olds that feels like he's been around forever. Like he feels like he's 34. Yeah. And just looking at it, I'm leaning du Plessis, but I mean, who knows? Maybe the Khamzat factor here is what Till needs. Having Khamzat in his corner, so to speak, is what he needs to win a fight like this. I mean, it's obvious Darren Till needs this win probably more than any other fighter on this card.
Absolutely,
I think you would agree with that. I think this is, out of all of them, this would be like the desperation fight out of all of these, and simply because I think Till needs it so badly, I'm gonna go with him in the upset. And I think it's gonna be in pretty impressive fashion. I think he's gonna get a knockout. I wouldn't be surprised if Till has had one of his better camps that he's ever had. He says he feels great, that he's in incredible shape. He was showing off his abs to the camera. I mean, he genuinely seems like he's there, but du Plessis he looks like a beast. And plus he's South African and doesn't curse. So, he's got the right
mindset. Du Plessis is a beast. But one thing I've noticed about his fights is that he comes out swinging in the first round and he leaves himself open. He's sort of similar to Pimblett in that sense is that he comes out, he starts swinging, and he gives his opponents openings. He is hittable in that first round. And then he sort of goes through this phase in between rounds where he's like, wait a minute, I have great grappling. I have great wrestling. I'm just going to wrestle you and win this fight. He's done that in pretty much all of his UFC fights. So I think Darren Till's path to victory is that first round knockout. The first round is usually Till's best round anyway. And I think early on, Duplessis, who's said he's going to search for a spectacular finish, he's going to leave himself open. Till is a precise striker. I think Till can get that knockout in the first round. And next up is Bryce Mitchell versus Ilia Topuria. This is a very intriguing fight. This is the closest fight on the odds on the main card. Bryce Mitchell is only a plus 120 underdog, and Ilia Topuria is a minus 140 favorite. These are two guys with great grappling, great wrestling. Topuria obviously has heavier hands, but Bryce Mitchell has the second twister submission in UFC history. The only other guy who has one is the Korean Zombie. These are two undefeated featherweights, very talented guys looking to make a name for themselves. And the grappling is very intriguing. And what I'm most interested in is if Ilia Topuria is looking past Bryce Mitchell, because he was focusing almost entirely on Paddy Pimblett during that press conference. What do you think? Do you think Ilia Topuria is making a mistake looking past Bryce Mitchell?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I mean, he was obsessed. Paddy's claim that this guy might be obsessed with Paddy doesn't sound all that ridiculous when you consider that when Paddy started talking in the press conference, that's when Topuria started chiming in, and that's sort of what cascaded these events that led to that confrontation. But I don't think Topuria is looking past Bryce Mitchell. I mean, anytime you're going up against another undefeated fighter, I can't imagine you'd be that naive to look past him. The thing I look at this is it feels, obviously Duplessis has grappling. It feels like if this fight gets to the ground, it leans heavily towards Mitchell.
You mean Mitchell? Mitchell has grappling.
Well, Topuria has a little bit of grappling, right? I mean, he's the better striker for sure. He's no question about it. Topuria's got the knockout power out of these two. If this fight gets to the ground, it leans heavily towards Mitchell. My thing about Mitchell is it feels like he's not getting the type of respect he deserves. But, you know, part of me wonders if it's because he's more well known for trying to debate Joe Rogan on flat earth theory than he is for, you know, being a UFC fighter. But no, I genuinely, and he also, but here's the thing, Mitchell, he got those cargo shorts that he's been asking for from the UFC. Yep. He's been asking for those for a while, and he finally got them. I think that bodes very poorly for Duplessis. So I'm taking Mitchell in this fight.
Topuria.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm taking Mitchell in this fight. It looks bad for Topuria, and I'm going to take the upset. It's not this fight is kind of a virtual coin flip, though. It's not, the odds aren't that crazy.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if it goes to the ground, Mitchell is going to have a slight advantage. I mean, Topuria is good everywhere, but he is known for his knockout power. He is a guy with very nice striking, but I agree that Mitchell doesn't really get the recognition that he deserves. A lot of people see Topuria as this up-and-coming undefeated guy who's very talented, but for whatever reason, Mitchell doesn't get that recognition. Even though in his last fight, he beat Edson Barbosa, who's a legend. Obviously, Barbosa's been trending downwards, but and Ilia Topuria knocked out Ryan Hall. So these are two guys who have taken out legends on their climb up, and now they're facing each other. It's a fight that's really good for the UFC, and it's really good for the featherweight division, which has been kind of stagnant. You know, there's been a lot of delays. You know, Volkanovski and Max Holloway have sort of been at the top, and it's going to be really good for 145 to get some new blood injected into it. So whoever wins this fight is going to represent that new blood, even though you have to assume that if Topuria wins, he's going to move up to fight Paddy at lightweight.
Yeah, that seems to be the likely scenario here. So I'm going to take Mitchell in this one. Who are you taking? Are you taking Mitchell or are you taking Topuria?
I'm taking Mitchell because my super parlay, I did one of these last edition, I'm doing it this time, is the underdog parlay.
Okay.
Pick every single underdog on the main card, because remember, I talked about how they all have a path to victory. That gives plus 15,769 odds. That means if you put $10 down, you win $1,500, almost $1,600. Now, obviously, last time I talked, I had the OG parlay, the sentimental value parlay, and I said Darren Elkins was the parlay buster. So maybe if you do this parlay, take Elkins out. This time, I think the parlay buster is Jan Blachowicz. I do think Ankalaev is going to win that fight, but this parlay still gives pretty good odds at plus 4,247. So you win $400 by putting down 10. It's a great high value parlay. What do you make of the underdog parlay?
Yeah, I really like it, and I think that you're right on the money with pulling Jan from the parlay. I think that makes a lot of sense. I would take the parlay without Jan, and I actually see a scenario where this hits. This would make a lot of sense to me. But the odds of plus 15,000 is so intriguing that for $10, why not? The Polish power.
I mean, it's very low risk.
Yeah,
everyone has $10 they can put up, right? And then you just have to hedge your bets on that Polish power.